The hero had vanquished the demon king, bringing peace to the world. But what awaited him? His entire family and friends were executed, and he himself was tortured to death. Embracing the power of darkness, he returned with a heart filled with vengeance, vowing to bathe in the blood of the ungrateful. The truth was clear: the foolish are easily controlled, but the overly righteous are exploited. Bound and standing before the kingdom's princess and others, his face seething with hatred. She had captured him, wanting to eliminate him, for his strength alone surpassed even the demon king. Thus, to her, he was the only real threat, but his rejection of her love led to his current fate. With an inhuman smile, she ordered her minions to swiftly end his life. Before closing his eyes, he cursed venomously, swearing to return for revenge. Then, the fate of these people would be as small pieces of meat, shredded and thrown to the dogs. He reincarnated and met the goddess of love, condemning her for watching his suffering without intervention. To atone, she agreed to his request to increase his strength, aiding his revenge. A year later, a grand festival was in full swing at the kingdom of Kurz and Auerbach Castle. Praise for the princess's splendor echoed endlessly from the flatterers. The one deemed worthy of the princess was Emil Sama, whom they believed the princess could enchant. The princess was presented with the most exquisite and pure dress, crafted by top tailors. Despite her radiant beauty, her face failed to inspire goodwill. But a second later, she viciously whipped her maid who had just complimented her, dismissing the dress as mediocre and demanding another. The unfortunate maid's body was quickly removed, and another dress was sought. These incidents might bode ill for the upcoming parade. The kingdom had been plagued by headaches recently, so every issue required attention. A month ago, all the guards at the city gates were murdered, followed by another group of soldiers found drowned in a pool of blood. The crime scene was flooded with water from an unknown source, raising suspicions. The royal investigation team was promptly dispatched to investigate but returned with no leads. Commander Sandler of the Royal Army decided to speak with Princess Victoria about the situation. Tentatively, he expressed his fear and suggested postponing today's parade. Recent events remained unsolved, leaving the Royal Army in disarray. Even their elite forces were mysteriously killed, and high-ranking officials died from an odd, unexplained illness. However, for the authoritarian Princess Victoria, these incidents seemed irrelevant. Her only concern was that today, not a single hair on her head would be harmed. She declared that if anything happened, the name of the Royal Army would cease to exist in this place. Linking all the events, Sandler proposed postponing the parade. Each of these victims had murmured a blessing for the princess before dying. Yet, Victoria remained indifferent. To her, the primary threats, the demon king and the hero, were gone. Moreover, today, she had plenty of human shields, including the people and the hero. A cruel woman, she proclaimed herself as the sole entity deserving existence, considering herself the kingdom's treasure. The sacrifice of countless lives meant nothing to her. The parade continued amid the joyful cheers of the populace. They praised Princess Victoria and then Prince Auclair, the eldest son of Count Auclair, destined to marry her. He valued this marriage highly. But enduring him was part of her grand scheme, to bear a son, place him on the throne, seize power, and live out her wicked dreams. Hence, despite his annoyance, Victoria decided to tolerate him to fulfill her ambitions. She glanced at her future husband, pleased with his handsome appearance. Yet, Victoria couldn't forget the captivating, brave eyes of Rual, the hero who had rejected her and was unjustly led to his death. But now, that no longer mattered. The wedding began with the people's praises and the priest's blessings. Unexpectedly, the final blessing was a prayer for the princess. As she realized where she had heard these words before, it was too late, her groom's head had already fallen to the ground. The priest removed his hat, revealing fiery red eyes filled with hatred and rage. Victoria was shocked and frightened, unable to comprehend how Rual, whom she witnessed dying, could now stand before her. But this was Rual, the hero reborn from the depths of hell, here to avenge himself. If she was puzzled, Rual didn't hesitate to explain why he was there. Initially, he was granted strength by the goddess of love to save innocent humans from the demon king. However, he never anticipated that humans could be so ungrateful as to kill their savior. Thus, blinded by her love, the goddess gave him more power and helped him resurrect to carry out his revenge. Despite not wanting to trouble the goddess, he was also tormented because of these deities. After presenting an ultimatum, he decided to begin his vengeance. He was determined to achieve his goal, warning everyone not to stand in his way. Only purified souls could ascend to heaven, any god breaking this rule would face his wrath. He asked the goddess to unleash the dark power within him, even if it meant being consumed by darkness. The goddess, bewildered, asked why he wouldn't choose to stay in heaven and enjoy eternal happiness. But to Rual, his only happiness now was to slaughter the ungrateful. The goddess, blinded by her love for Rual, quickly abandoned right and wrong to help him fulfill his desire. She kissed him, and immediately Rual felt a new energy flowing through him. What remained was to resurrect. Before that, the goddess kissed him goodbye and wished him her blessings. He began his inhuman massacre on the day of Princess Victoria's wedding. The bloodbath he orchestrated was for those who reveled in the murder of his family and were complicit in it. Eagerly stepping over their bodies, he advanced towards the so-called sacred wedding hall of Victoria. His excitement was palpable, bordering on madness, no longer caring about anything around him. For someone pushed to the brink of desperation to the point of resurrection, this was what he had long awaited. A soldier rushed to protect the princess, standing trembling before Rual. The princess, more afraid of being dirted than the person in front of her, screamed hysterically for someone to save her. But Rual was suspected of being a demon's minion, masquerading as a hero to create chaos. Those who didn't pay for the royal feasts under the guise of church donations were labeled as demons' minions. Countless had been slaughtered brutally by the royal army under this pretense. Exposed, the soldier stood frozen, unable to speak. But since Rual was there not for a chat, he decided to grab the princess by her hair and yank her towards him. The people, witnessing Rual with a sword decapitate an entire army with a single stroke, fled in panic. The sight delighted Rual, forcing the princess to watch those who cared only for themselves. He declared he would perform a show where Princess Victoria would be the star. It would be unique and entertaining, especially with a large audience, as he promised a one-of-a-kind performance. The commoners, forced to witness this, were terrified, their cries for help unending. They claimed innocence, but they hadn't thought twice when cheering for the execution of Rual's family. They loudly called for the princess, now their only hope of salvation, but Victoria herself realized her dire situation. She ordered Sandra to come to her rescue, unaware that Sandra's legs were firmly planted in the ground. In Victoria's eyes, even if Sandra had to cut off her legs to save her, she should do so. Rual, knowing that Sandra was an innocent soldier uninvolved in these events, let her stand there. Today's parade was to announce the princess's wedding, so it couldn't just feature one performer. Turning to Eau Claire, Rual flashed a terrifying smile. In a second, Eau Claire was flung against the princess, continuously crying for his mother. It was laughable that the princess's fiancé was such a mama's boy. Victoria, humiliated and angry, hurled insults but was powerless in Rual's grasp. Rual mocked the princess's red dress as inappropriate for the occasion. Then, with a ripping sound, he tore her dress, leaving her exposed before her subjects. He insinuated if she was eager for a child, he would help fulfill that wish today. To Sandra, this was the lowest of tactics, but they seemed to have forgotten their own deeds. Rual was once hailed by the people, especially in his hometown. Yet, when peace was restored to the kingdom, Victoria ordered the annihilation of his village, gruesomely impaling its inhabitants on spikes. She eagerly anticipated seeing Rual's face upon witnessing this horror. When Rual returned, the scene of his bloodbath-stricken village left him speechless. Ambushed by Sandra, he found his village lifeless, drowned in a sea of blood. Sandra declared that any command from the princess must be obeyed, regardless of the number of lives taken. Rual amplified her confession for all to hear. Her earlier claims of righteousness now fueled the people's outrage. The situation reached a climax, and Rual began to torture the devilish princess. He controlled Sandra to repeatedly punch the princess's face, not stopping until she begged for mercy. But her once beautiful face was nothing but a messy pulp now. Rual commenced his vengeance for his sister's innocent death right there. Before the conquest of the Demon King, a tragedy was about to befall the siblings, unknown to anyone. The sister, with her beautiful faith, smiled kindly at her brother, unaware of what the future held. She always stayed in the church, praying for everyone, especially her brother, before he went to battle. She bid him farewell while heavily pregnant, eagerly awaiting his return. The unborn child longed for a hero to protect it. After completing his mission and returning, Rual was ambushed and brought before the princess. She set fire to the village and blamed Rual, but also offered to save him if he agreed to stay by her side. Rual, despising such cowardice, was angrily sent away by her. He was taken to the church, but as soon as he entered, the stench of blood hit him. Lying before him was the body of his sister in a pool of blood, her eyes still open. Her last words to him before he went to war resonated deeply in his heart. At that moment, he vowed to return and avenge his sister. Rual swore to make the princess understand the fate of those ungrateful to him and his sister. But a voice in his head told him he couldn't kill her swiftly and easily. He must torture her until she begged for release. First, he pinned her to the ground, binding her limbs so she couldn't move. Then came the unexplained stomach pains that made the princess scream as if being slaughtered. Rual kindly reminded her to shut up quickly, as screaming would only make her lose more blood. So, if she didn't want to bleed to death, she should endure in silence. The princess, truly not understanding why this was happening, screamed to know the reason. This was just retribution for all she had done. The soldiers behind were also forewarned by Rual about the punishment they would soon face. But for now, the performance would end here. He decided to stop at this point. Seeing her in a pitiful state on the ground, no longer resembling a human, Rual felt immensely satisfied. He intended to leave, but suddenly she screamed, ordering her soldiers to capture Rual and stab him in the chest. Before she could revel in her supposed revenge, Rual just smiled a demonic smile. Apparently, Victoria had forgotten that he was no ordinary hero. Such stabs meant nothing to him. He slowly pulled the swords from his chest, feeling no pain. The princess's eyes widened in horror at this sight, unable to believe what she was seeing. Rual knew this was thanks to the goddess's blessing, not like the demon Victoria, who feasted on human flesh. He left, promising to return when the princess regained her beauty. Before leaving, he mockingly wished her a happy wedding, blessing Princess Victoria. His next destination was the church where his sister suffered her eternal injustice. He bowed to her spirit, then burned down the place, vowing never to return. He recounted killing the treacherous priest who betrayed his sister, described how the square was now in chaos. The people were mad, calling for the princess's death, while her stomach was beyond repair. Rual had carefully set traps around the kingdom, ensuring no one could escape. Priest Gustav, living in a grand castle built with extorted money, was shocked to see Rual alive. Despite offering bribes, Rual refused to spare him. He exposed Gustav's truth and killed him by drowning, the same fate Gustav had inflicted on the innocent. Before leaving, Rual assured his sister's spirit that all this was for his own revenge. He comforted her soul and left, preparing for the upcoming act. He swore not to show mercy to anyone, nor forgive any reason given. All guilty parties would pay for their actions. Now, at Auerbach Castle, eerie noises and screams filled the air. Sandra, tied to a wall, endured lashes from Victoria's beloved leather whip, unable to resist. The princess said she was being punished for not severing her legs to save her, and now must bear this punishment. Regardless of anything, Victoria didn't listen to Sandra's explanations, only seeking to take her life. Now, unable to go out and wreak havoc, Victoria blamed everything on Sandra, demanding she endure fitting punishment. Sandra's life was now worth less than a strand of the princess's hair, so she must bear her punishment. Sandra couldn't be killed, not out of Victoria's mercy, but because of some protective shield preventing any harm to her. All blades seemed unable to touch Sandra, as if under a curse. Perhaps it was the hero's magic, driving the princess mad in her pursuit of him. The soldiers, though terrified, could do nothing but quickly follow her orders. Defying the princess or facing the hero meant death for them. Their only task was to find Rual and bring his head to her. This event had the entire country in fear, rendering the royal army useless. They decided to seek the one person who could handle this situation. A soldier, galloping through the forest, sought someone who could help capture Rual. His panicked and anxious demeanor showed the urgency of the situation. On his way, he unexpectedly encountered a group of goblins blocking the path, forcing him to dismount and fight. Not just goblin soldiers, but the Goblin King himself appeared. At that moment, a swordsman emerged, swiftly dealing with them with a few sword strokes. This kind man inquired about the soldier's well-being and helped him up for a conversation. He was the kingdom's top swordsman, the one the princess was desperately trying to summon for help. He was the only one who could assist the princess now. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation was overheard by a strange creature lurking nearby, unnoticed. This man was the kingdom's top swordsman and the people's only hope at that moment. A few days earlier, while dining with his family, he had mentioned needing to go to the capital for a few days. His children knew their father was being summoned to hunt down the notorious hero causing trouble recently. This morning, a messenger had arrived, so the swordsman had to quickly make his way to the capital. His children eagerly anticipated their father's success, hoping he would ruthlessly kill the hero. Coming from a warrior lineage, they were excited for him to return and teach them martial arts in 6 months. The father, contentedly looking at his happy family at the dining table, was unaware of the terrifying future awaiting him. He promised the children he would bring back exciting toys if they were diligent and well-behaved in their studies. His beautiful and gentle wife smiled proudly at him, trusting and supporting him wholeheartedly. A servant approached to ask what meal should be prepared for the royal messenger, but was quickly pulled away by the butler. It was the servant's first day on the job, and he was still learning, but the swordsman, being kind-hearted, didn't mind. He mentioned that the messenger had already left in a hurry, so no special preparation was needed. At that moment, the maid brought in a special dish, a long-standing tradition before the swordsman went to battle. The children, enticed by the aroma, were eager to taste it, but their father stopped them. He explained it was his hunt, and they would have to earn their own if they wanted some. Cutting a big piece of meat, he savored the victorious flavor, thinking about the messenger's effort to secure such excellent game. The next day, at Obertha's northern fortress, the swordsman mounted his horse and bid farewell to his family, heading to the bustling capital. His children obediently followed his instructions to practice and study, but something was amiss. Contrary to their innocent appearance, they were actually hunting their pet. Thinking their father would buy them a new one, they decided to butcher and fry the pet. The terrified dog ran wildly but eventually succumbed to the cruel blows of the children. The two angel-faced devils, bored with the dog's lack of resistance, decided to finish it off. But before they could act, a terrifying voice echoed, freezing them in their tracks. Rual had been standing behind them all along, casually expressing his desire to join in their twisted game. The children's crimes were laid bare under the clear sky, but they showed no fear. It was only when Rual tied them up, hands and feet, leaving them lying on their backs, that they realized the seriousness of the situation. Their cries for help, hoping to be heard by the servants, seemed almost futile. They boasted of being the children of General Brown, warning that if Brown caught Rual, he would not spare him. However, Rual was unfazed by such childish threats. He showed them the scene outside, highlighting the particular situation. The servants were frantically digging up the yard, searching for something mysterious. They didn't dare stop, even without supervision, leaving the children wide-eyed with surprise. Eventually, one of the servants shouted, drawing Rual's attention. They had unearthed a pile of human bones buried in the Browns' garden. This was evidence of General Brown's ruthless and inhumane cruelty. But this was just a small part of it, so Rual ordered them to continue searching. He knew the servants here were complicit, paid off for killing and disposing of bodies. Rotten like their master, Rual couldn't forgive any of them. He grabbed the butler after finding the head of the royal messenger who had just visited the day before. The previous night's barbecue was made from this very person, and no one could deny it. When the butler claimed ignorance, his head was swiftly severed from his body in the blink of an eye. The children suddenly became eager and excited, saying their father would surely return soon. Unbeknownst to them, Lady Brown was standing behind a wall nearby, armed with a poisoned bow and arrow aimed at Rual. She had poisoned it with a substance that could even kill the Goblin King, intending to use it on Rual for dinner that night. But before the children could rejoice, the arrow reversed its course, striking Lady Brown instead. She foamed at the mouth and convulsed in front of her children, much to Rual's satisfaction. Realizing they had no one left to rely on, the children quickly backed away in fear. Rual gleefully anticipated that it was now time for these little devils to face his judgment. On one side, General Brown